working today. It almost feels like I'm being set up for something. I hate to be paranoid, but it's one of my better qualities. Gosh, that even worked. Woo. We're continuing on our series that Mike started called Strength for the Storms of Life. Today, my task is to speak a little bit about vocational storms. I've always found this to be a fascinating topic because one of the things I love about Christianity as it's communicated by this particular ministry is it's not only spiritual, but it's purely practical. I've come to understand that the best spirituality really has everything to do with normal life. I don't think that we really can make those hard and fast distinctions in our life between the natural and the supernatural. I think that as the more that I learn and the more I study the Bible, the more I see how God's teachings directly impact not only our afterlife, but our life in the here and now. And that's why I think it's good to go through this series and talk about some of the real world challenges that we seem to face trying to live in both worlds. And I know I've often said that I think life could be a whole lot easier if I could just move into one world or the other and live there. I think it would be easy to be so spiritual that you didn't have to worry about any earthly considerations. I also know that it would be easier if I could only worry about things earthly and not have to regard God or morality at all. I think what makes life sometimes almost impossibly difficult is that it seems that we're always trying to juggle these two and try to find some way of incorporating them together. I can't remember exactly where I heard it first, but it was something on television, a man trying to explain the concept of work to his son. And what I recall him saying is, work is work. If work was fun, it'd be called fun. And then you'd have to pay them to let you do it. That made sense to me. The whole word work, in my reaction to it anyway, has always implied something negative. At my job that I work at, people, joke about how work is a 4-letter word and, all the bumper sticker sayings, they're kind of anti-work. But I do think that just by its very nature, work implies some challenges. And when we talk about the storms of life as they relate to our jobs, I think I just tried to brainstorm some common things that I've experienced and maybe you have too. Anybody here hate their job? Anybody feel trapped? Anybody that believes they're overworked and underpaid? Maybe there's people here that don't even have a job, that are suffering at the moment from unemployment. Or others who don't even know what they want to be when they grow up, or as we say, if they grow up. People that are struggling with even finding the right career. Is your boss an idiot? Do you have a lack of job security? And even for those that may be business owners, I believe you'll agree that even being the boss doesn't insulate you from a lot of the struggles of life because you have a whole different set of problems and responsibilities. Problems with employees instead of employers, problems with the business climate, taxes, government. So whatever our particular challenges, I think that it is a true thing to say most people struggle at one level or another with their work. I think it's not by accident that one of the most popular comic strips in our country right now is the Dilbert series. To me, that's not even a comic, it's a documentary. Both Sherry and I work in corporate environments, and we're constantly trading stories of the insanity of some of the decisions that get made and some of the things, just like in the Dilbert series, that makes you go, "Mah?" But I was in studying and preparing for this, I found out that even in the Old Testament, they had apparently the same struggles. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, "There is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones." And one translation for rich means gifted, talented, qualified. I have seen slaves on horseback while princes go on foot like slaves. Makes a good screensaver on your computer at work. Till the boss sees it. So obviously our struggles with our work in America is nothing new, because even way back then they had the same problems. Another thing that's very popular in today's society are TV shows, like, I can't remember the exact name of it, but something to do with America's worst jobs. I think, again, it's not by accident that people love watching things like that to make them feel better about themselves. You get home from work and turn that on and go, well, at least I didn't have to do that today. And even in that, even though some people have it worse, it doesn't make us always feel better. It's also true that life used to seem, years ago, to be divided into more manageable compartments. The general rule of thumb was 24 hours a day. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of play and family time, and 8 hours of sleep. I don't want to ask for a show of hands, but I'll bet that maybe a majority of us wish that we could get 8 hours of sleep. I always do, just not in a row. It's more like the week. And, so it seems like we're constantly juggling there, and we're stealing time from work and taking time from our families and time from recreation, because in today's society, work becomes ever more demanding. So, with all of these challenges, I think it obviously then leads the question, what can we expect from God in relation to our work? I really believe that's the $64 question in all of this, because, again, I never saw God as the solution for anything, because in my thinking, I always saw God as the problem. And if God's the problem, how can He be the solution? All I had to do was read an auto or home insurance policy. I read a whole list of bad things, some of them storm-related, floods and tornadoes and wind damage, and I summarized them all by calling them what? Acts of God. So if that's truly what God's job is to, stay busy planning hurricanes and floods, then what's He going to do for me? I thought that maybe God was in the insurance business as it related to the next life. Sometimes we jokingly refer to that understanding of Christianity as fire insurance. Get saved, go to a better place, but meanwhile you're stuck in the here and now, and God is a hands-off kind of a guy. I do think that God, was in the flood insurance business at one time. It worked for Noah. But that was the only record I could really find, of God providing that. And I think that if you're wired like me, a lot of my frustrations in life seem to revolve around injustice. I think if you split me open, what you'd find is a set of scales. And as long as they're in balance, I have peace of mind. But when it came to work, I rarely, if ever, saw things as being fair. I might date myself a bit here, but I remember when MTV played music. They had videos on there, and one of my favorites was one by a guy named Randy Newman. He did a song called "It's Money That Matters." And some of the lyrics said, "Of all of the people that I used to know, most never adjusted to the great big world. I see them lurking in bookstores, working for the public radio, carrying their babies around in a sack on their back, moving careful and slow. All of these people are much brighter than I. In any fair system, they would flourish and thrive, but they barely survive. They eke out a living, and they barely survive." And you see, that's what the book of Ecclesiastes tells us, how the race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. It's not always fair, and sometimes the bad guys win and the good guys lose. And where do you file that? I think people that work in the trenches often see people promoted that, did it more by playing office politics than they did by actually producing the work. And sometimes your best employees are the ones most abused and mistreated, and they end up walking off. So, that song kind of summarized a lot of my attitudes, because life wasn't always fair, and I didn't always see this justice, and I didn't really see God originally doing a whole lot about it. But that's why it's good to study at a little bit of a deeper level, because I think we can summarize basically how God approaches our problems in two ways. I think that there's a lot of practical, valuable information in the Bible on problem solving. But I also believe there's a lot of valuable information in the Bible on problem preventing. I believe that a Christian way of life is a great way to prevent a lot of the problems that we see other normal people have in the real world. So, a lot of the challenges that I see when it comes to how people create problems through their career, it goes back to how God hardwired each and every one of us. If you were to take a survey and ask people what they wanted, you'd get literally a limitless, thousands of different answers. What do you want? Well, I want this, I want that, I want this other thing. But then if you narrow it down and say, okay, what do you really want? We'd all have exactly the same answer. I've come to understand that all any of us really want is peace. Looking back over my life, I clamored for a lot of things, but ultimately everything I chose to do and everything I refused to do was always about a quest for peace. I just wanted it to be quiet in my head. I just wanted to relax. And I've come to understand that the way God wired humans and also wired all creatures great and strong was He gave us all three basic instincts for survival. An instinct for society, for security, and for sexuality. And we'll never have peace until we satisfy those three basic instincts. I always remember them in my own mind as social security sex. That's for what it's worth. And if you think about the decisions you make every day, they all revolve around obtaining those three things in some way or another. And I think that's where work comes into that equation is, I think for all of us, at one level or another, if you have a job, it's all about getting security, right? Because in this world, money is security. Randy Newman, it's money that matters in the USA. But unfortunately, we spend so much time at work, and so much of work is relational, that we not only end up putting our outer security in our jobs, but we start to put our inner security in our jobs. It's not just about keeping our stuff, but it's also about how we feel, how we look. We start to develop security in here because of our job or because of who or what we are in life. And then we start to put more eggs in that basket because it's not just about security, it's about society. And the way that God-given instinct works is that none of us has a gauge on our own dashboard we can look at to see how we're doing. We need peers that give us feedback to tell me how I'm doing. Am I okay? Am I not okay? Am I dressed right? Am I dressed funny? There's no right or wrong answer. It just depends on what your peers think. And you can't escape that. It's God-given. So we start to derive our social status, our self-esteem from our jobs. And then on top of that, people start dating at work and all of their relationships start to revolve around work. And by the time you know it, every one of their instincts is all about that job. So it's no wonder that any threat to these instincts produces a tremendous amount of resentment and a tremendous amount of fear. And all of a sudden, what was supposed to make us secure makes us insecure because it's all riding on that one turn of the wheel. All of our eggs are in that job basket. And the punchline is, if we're looking for security in this world, I'll let you in on a secret. There isn't any. Hello? See, we're, like Mike teaches, digging dry wells in a desert that have no water in them. We look for these things in this world. Because the way this whole thing got started was the very first man, Adam, came right out with a job. The first thing he did. It says, I printed in our worship bulletins, how God created Adam to work. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. The very first man was given tasks to do. But where things got screwed up, if you understand the sin that was committed in the Garden of Eden, the real sin of Adam was the sin of self-sufficiency. It wasn't that he wanted bad things, it's just that he tried to get them apart from God. Through the serpent's deception, he came to believe that, man, if I'm going to make this work down here, if I'm going to pull it together, I need to get my own food. I need to make my own decisions on what's right and wrong. I need to obtain knowledge of what's good and what's evil, but God isn't going to do that for me. I can't be dependent on Him, so what am I going to depend on? Myself. So that's where man separated from God and went over and tried to get things to work out on their own power, using their own reasoning and their own will. Adam left the garden with a job. It wasn't a punishment, it was an inevitable consequence of what happened next. And God said, your lot in life is going to be to live by the sweat of your brow and to toil, to raise food and to try and eke out a living in the world. But it was a different task than what God originally gave him to do. Similar, but it wasn't the same. So it's really a true thing then that we live in a fallen world. We have an adversary, and we all have a cross to bear. Those are biblical truths. And our problem in this world is deception. We face an adversary that seeks to kill, to steal, and destroy. If I were a devil, what I would want is to try and use everything in this world to destroy people and to get them either to separate from God or, even better, to turn against Him. That's what devils do. And that's what our adversary in this world does. So it just makes good sense then that our adversary in this world would try to bombard us with pain and problems in order to get us to doubt God's love and support and to start depending more and more on ourselves and our own resources. And if we buy those lies, we can end up defeated. The word kill means to rob of life. There's a lot of dead men walking out there. They're alive physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, they're graveyard dead. You know, if you don't believe me, come to my job and look around at 4:30. Watch them walk in. The devil also seeks to destroy us, and the word destroy means to render useless. The word steal means to convert to his own use. So in all of those things, the devil tries to use something that could be good and turn it from an asset into a liability. It is just a true thing that God has blessed each and every one of us with gifts, talents, and abilities. Sometimes it's fascinated me how there's people that you see, and especially like in Sioux Falls with our current low unemployment rate, there's a lot of people working out there, and I'm always kind of amazed at how people somehow or another can find productive ways of making a living. Sometimes their resourcefulness just amazes me. But it goes to show that God, in His grace and mercy, has blessed everyone with ways of making a living. But unfortunately, along with that, we also all have defects of character. So, because of those defects, I think those things in our heads are the very things that can twist us around and confuse us and sometimes get us to make bad decisions in the area of work. How many people have made bad career decisions based on fear? Man, if I lose this job, I'm going to be living under the 8th Street Bridge. Nobody ever thinks of losing their job and getting a better one, do they? That's never entered my mind. You know, if you lose your job, it'd be a blessing because you'd probably get a better one. That's not what my voice in my head says. It's either this job or starve to death in an alley. And so a lot of decisions that we make in life are based on nothing more than fear. Some work decisions are based in anger and resentment. You know, a country song I can't repeat the name of from up here, Take This Job, and, you know, people love that. Why? Because it's something everybody, I think, has thought about at one time or another. I'm going to go in there and tell that boss what I really think of him. And it's going to feel good when you do it. Of course, then you got to go live under the 8th Street Bridge. But it'd feel really good. And we end up making decisions in our jobs based on resentment and anger. Sometimes we make decisions based on greed. Because you know there's two ways that employers hold people in bondage, don't you? By paying them too little or paying them too much. Sometimes you keep people working for you because they can't afford to leave. They miss one day's work to look for another job, they're bankrupt. But there's other people that are held in bondage because they make too much money. And they know that greed is going to keep them on the hook. So people make a lot of decisions based on that. Another example is people making decisions based on envy and pride. Taking jobs just because it makes them look good to other people. It increases their social status. They don't like the work they do. They despise it sometimes. But, you know, they're willing to sell themselves or even sell their souls just to get certain things in return. Pride and ego, guilt. You know, a lot of people end up working in family businesses just because, you know, they've done so much for me and, you know, I owe them or whatever. And finally, you know, a lot of decisions even get made in laziness. Sloth is one of the 7 capital sins, and sometimes people just take the easy way because they don't want a challenge or to exert themselves. So you see, it's true that some work problems are purely vocational. I think that sometimes through deception, through pressure outside or inside, we tend to get deceived and screwed up, and we start to make bad decisions in our choice of career. For instance, I made a bad career decision in the job I had when I left high school. I got a job working all summer for Sioux Empire Roofing here in town. Not bad per se, except I am deathly afraid of heights. And the only reason I took that job was because it was the highest paying job I could find that summer. You know, and, you know, it was not a good job for me. So I'm like the first day on the job, it's okay. I'm up like 6 stories working on this building, you know, down in Yankton. It's okay. Lean over the edge of this roof with this rope and pull all these tools up like this. Okay. But I did it. Not for long. But those are the kinds of decisions we make when we're not thinking clearly. So some of our challenges is that we have challenges vocationally, but a lot of our work challenges are relational. And again, where does Christianity fit into that? I think that God in His infinite wisdom is there to help us get along with other people. I think that a huge part of practicing, of living this Christian life, is to develop Christ-like qualities. And some people think, well, they fired me because I'm a Christian. And I'm not saying that can't happen. But I think if you really back up and look at it, in many cases, if you were an employer and you had an employee who was Christ-like, wouldn't you like to keep them around? Because someone who is Christ-like manifests every virtue, every positive quality that you could hope to find in a human being. This employee is hardworking, he's dedicated, he's faithful, he's loyal, he's patient, he's persevering, he's very forgiving, he's kind and gentle and loving. That's it, you're out of here. Many more people that I've seen have been fired for manifesting non-Christ-like qualities. So I think that the more that we can apply practical Christianity to learn to focus on our own defects of character and overcome them, I think the better position that we're going to be in. Because a big part of this is about overcoming obstacles, both internal and external. But I also believe that some of the bad decisions we make are purely vocational. And again, if I was a devil and I wanted to destroy God's people, what better way than to take a huge chunk of their life, the chunk dedicated to work, and make that so untenable, so miserable that they can't survive. And that's why I think part of applying the principles of the Bible is to learn to take an honest assessment of exactly what our gifts, talents, and abilities really are. Do you know what an efficiency expert does at work? Sometimes work gets so bogged down they hire a guy from the outside to come in. And what efficiency experts do is they take an honest assessment of everyone's talents and abilities, look at all their strengths on the one column, and then they look at all their liabilities, all their weaknesses on the other. And invariably what they find is they've got great people, but they're all working in the wrong positions. The jobs that people end up doing, they have no passion for, they have no talent for, they have no training for. But if you just rearrange the tasks, everything can run great. And part of that is there's a book I read one time called The Peter Principle that says in a hierarchy, a person tends to get promoted to their level of incompetence. See, we have a hierarchy at my job where I work in the printing industry. That's my real job. And if you're a great press operator, you can only make so much. But then where's the money then? Well, you got to leave that work and get promoted into supervision. Okay, but just because you're great at running a machine doesn't mean you're good at running people. But even if you succeed at that, you can only go so high, and then what? Well, now you have to become a manager. And now you're one step farther removed from what you're good at. And smart business sometimes says if you have somebody that's good and they're productive, you're better off leaving them where they're at, instead of constantly changing people's tasks till they get painted into a corner. And once you're there, they don't fire you or demote you. You're just stuck in a dead-end job, barely able to do what you're supposed to do. And that's the direction business often takes. So to kind of wrap this up, along all these lines, I'd like to just tell you a story of a guy I knew years ago that found himself in this position. As some of you know, my friends and I spend a lot of our time trying to help recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. And many years ago, there was this one friend of ours, a young guy who was desperately trying to stay sober. But one of the cross that it seemed that this particular gentleman had to bear was that for the life of him, he could not function in the normal world because he could not find where he fit. He didn't fit anywhere. And he tried and tried to find a career and become self-supporting, and he couldn't do it because he just hit brick wall after brick wall. His father was rather affluent. He had a lot of connections in town. He knew a lot of managers and business owners. And he got his son one good job after another, to the point where I'm sitting there going, hey, you think your pop could get me a job? And he had all these promising opportunities. And he'd go to work and he'd just fail miserably. He had no passion for it. He had no enthusiasm. He had no talent for any of it. And he constantly started to believe this lie that he's just helpless, hopeless. There's nothing he can do. So one of the things that we do that's purely practical, we started by running him through this spiritual gifts assessment, which coincidentally we're going to look at similar things at the fall retreat if anybody's interested. And even though this tells more about how you're equipped to serve God, it also has practical applications. And he took this gift assessment, and it turned out he was just flatlined, except he had this huge gift of mercy. And then that was about it. Okay. So then at the time, job service was open, sent him over there for a career assessment. And that was equally telling. He was completely flatlined except one area, and that was working in the medical profession. It was the only thing. Mercy, medical. So it was so obvious, dude, you're either going to have to do this or nothing at all. But you see, that's where he hit this wall. He said, but I can't do that. And he told this story of how when he was young, his sister was killed, and he was put in a room with her after she was killed in this hospital, and it was so traumatic, and he couldn't go there. He couldn't deal with that. And it was obvious that the only thing this guy was ever cut out for, the only thing he was ever qualified to do in life, somebody that we know put this huge boulder right in the middle of the road, and he couldn't go over it, through it, or around it. And so we continued to work with him and encouraged him to face that fear, to see it for what it was. And we encouraged him to take some classes along those lines, even though maybe he wouldn't ever be able to work in that profession, at least stick your toe in the water. So he took an EMT class, and he excelled at it, except he came to that one night where he had to spend a night in the emergency room. And this guy was terrified, just paralyzed with fear. But he knew by then that God was going to help him with that. He was not going to be there alone. And he knew by then that if he turned to God, that God was going to give him the strength that he needed to keep moving forward. And he spent that night there, and it turned out okay. And he finally just started to get over that obstacle. And after that, all the fear didn't dissipate. But it was a victory. He faced the fear instead of running from it. He ran towards it, and he did what he had to do. Today, that friend of ours works on an ambulance team in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Talk to him on the phone occasionally, and he talks about how exciting it is to all the things, that a big city brings, and all of the things that he sees and experiences in that line of work, things that I would not be able to do. And the only reason that he could do that was because of God. And that would be his testimony if he were here today. What was humanly impossible, what was he was naturally incapable of doing, he became supernaturally capable. But he was wise enough to realize what God had equipped him for. And he took an accurate assessment of two things: his strengths, talents, and abilities on the one hand, and the obstacles that only God could help him to overcome on the other. So I think the point is that the best time to fix a roof is when it's not raining. We need to look at our vocation, but we need to see it in light of overcoming these obstacles and accepting God's help to do that. So God does provide shelter, security, and insurance, but we have to trust Him to do it. I'm going to call the worship team forward, and we'll close with a song. And to just wrap things up as they're coming up, I think that the two most underrated virtues in Christianity, the two we talk about the least, but the Bible stresses are the most important, are patience and perseverance. History is replete with examples of people who simply succeeded because they didn't give up. And I think that whatever our challenges in life, that more than anything, what God will give us the strength to do is not. And as we stand for a word of closing prayer, Lord, as we go out from here today and into our weeks, we just pray that you help us to recall the story of the prodigal son. And though as we come to you, we believe that in turning to you, you may make us slaves, we come to find that you make us sons. And as we go to our jobs, those that are blessed with those, that we pray that you help us to always be mindful of the fact, Lord, that we don't work for our employers primarily, we work for you. So help us to glorify you through our work. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.